Kia ora, tēnā koutou. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Today's session is around electrifying how your people move, and really excited to be sharing this with everyone. We've got an hour in for today's session, and you'll have a range of speakers from Zilch, Genesis, and ourselves, Toitū and Envirocare. So the next slide will show you our agenda to cover today. We'll run through a bit of introductions, who's joining us on our panel today, a little bit about who we are, and then we'll hand over to our panel speakers to roughly about 10 minutes per session. We'll have a little bit on foundations of carbon transport, followed by electric mobility as a service, and as well from Genesis. As we go through the session, please feel free to drop any questions or comments you've got in the chat. We'll be looking and moderating that, but probably try and hold most of those until the end. We've got about 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, you can either fire them through as we go or save it till the end. It's about 10 minutes per speaker. So yeah, we hope you enjoy it. And before we kind of crack in, I'll just give a quick introduction to who we're joined by. So first of all, I'd just like to invite Lewis Porto, our technical advisor from Toitū and Envirocare, to say hi.
Kia ora koutou. Pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you very much for the time. Yeah, great to be sharing some concepts around carbon accounting, specifically with transport. I work here at Toitū as a technical advisor, helping organizations to measure their carbon footprint, reduce, and their way to neutrality. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Lewis. And next up is Kirsten.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui ki koutou. Thanks very much for having me here today and everyone tuning in. So I'm co-founder of Zilch and also Drive Electric board member. So very passionate around that transition to sustainable mobility. So I look forward to sharing some ideas. I'll hand over to Jason.
Kia ora guys, I'm Jason Britten from Genesis Energy. I'm the group manager for property and commercial partnerships. And we've been trying really hard to work on our emissions through a whole lot of things, including our transport and travel. So excited to be able to share with you what we've done. Some of it was done before my time, but I'm going to take credit for those that came before me. But yeah, hopefully some of the things we've done can be useful for those on the call today.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks, Jason, Kirsten, and Louis. Well, before we hand over and get into the session, just want to give a little bit of context to background of where we come from. Our mission is to catalyse action for a zero carbon future, and it is joined by a lot of our collective people, and hopefully everyone here today. Our heritage is strong, particularly in climate action, and you may recognise some of these logos, but it's an important ecosystem we operate in and kind of builds the foundations of who Toitū and Envirocare is. We are actually, many people don't know, but a spin out of Manaaki Whenua land care research of 21 years dating back. But the most important thing for us is about helping businesses, and we really kind of pride ourselves in international guidelines and being accredited as a certification provider. So I think we're probably best known for our carbon marks, and many of you who are on the call may be part of our program. And we're also known for our environment programs. So they build up a foundation of who we are and why we're here today. We're really keen to understand your challenges, and thank you for submitting a lot of questions today. We've got quite a pretty packed schedule. So if you do have any questions, we're not really diving into the program, but I know we did receive a lot. So as a quick overview, this gives you a sense of where we stand, what we offer. But if you'd like to learn more, we're happy to pick up that call afterwards, likewise for anyone else who covers in the session. But really, what I think is important from our side is getting New Zealand collectively to a zero carbon future. And we know it's not a one-stop shop, and we talk a lot about it being a transition. We also talk about it not being perfect along the way, and also just getting on with the mahi. And we're really proud that we've got over 900 businesses working together on this momentum. And I think the one thing that most people don't realize when they get on this decarbonisation pathway is the level of reductions you can create. And we see that pretty significantly across our member, but also outside our member base. And I think right now we're sitting around 17 to 20% average emission reduction in program. And it can go further, and we need it to go further in many cases. But I think transport is one area that we've been told by our member base of 900 businesses, and we're seeing in the market the need to better understand how we can electrify and reduce and tackle transport and business travel. So today's session really is about building on the foundations of that, what you need to know, and what I'd really like to do is be quiet so you can enjoy from the technical experts we've got with you today. And I'll hand it over to Lewis to kind of take you through about 10 minutes of foundations of what we view as the core around carbon emissions and how you can start factoring that into your day-to-day, your business, and begin to start mapping out that pathway if you're not already on it. So that's probably enough from me, but Lewis, over to you, buddy.
Thank you very much, Toby. As I said, pleasure to be here. So let's get started. When we talk about greenhouse gas emissions measurement, a classic analogy is the iceberg. That really helps us think about direct, indirect, and value chain emissions. And while we appreciate direct emissions on the surface, the most clear ones, the indirect and value chain emissions are harder to initially visualize. The important point to consider here is that how we tackle so many emissions so this doesn't become a daunting exercise. So a key tip is that after you complete your GHG measurement, you to focus on the hotspots and the low-hanging fruits. So as a good example, we have here down the value chain, one of the categories is purchase goods and service. And while this is quite a big ticket item, but it requires engagement from suppliers, better data quality, and those are things that will probably flow on a medium to long-term time frame. There are challenges related to specific emissions data and also alternative sources such as suppliers and materials. On the other hand, we have direct emissions on the top, such as fleet fuel. They will be featuring among your top sources, and they can be addressed on a short term. So that makes a really low-hanging fruit. So at the end of the day, this is a balancing exercise when you're drafting your roadmap. So it encompasses short, medium, and long-term alternatives versus the impact that those sources have. Moving ahead leads us to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standard. Quite a few of you might have seen this image and diagram before. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol framework really defines the emission sources as direct or indirect. And it's important to define what is value chain. In this case, we are capturing in your emission boundary. It's important to measure the full value chain so we have a clear and accurate view of those big tickets, hotspots, and those sort of things. Full value chain can also be called as scope 1, 2, and 3, as often in the market. We highlight here some of the emission sources related to transport. So we can see that while they also happen on direct terms, they also part of our value chain emissions. So it's important to emphasize this is crucial information that will guide your decarbonization strategy. So having a complete and accurate measurement, it's imperative here so we have an effective decarbonization strategy. Fantastic. So once we perform this exercise, you will understand your full value chain measurement, and you'll be able to clearly visualize some of the hotspots and define your strategies and policies around it. So from here, as said before, we would recommend focusing on your top categories, drafting a roadmap with alternatives. So what kind of projects and ideas are there out there, technologies, behavior changes, the reduction potential of those projects and ideas, the feasibility and time frame they apply as well. So you can prioritize the short-term projects and results, but without ignoring medium and long-term plans, as those will tend to have a biggest impact on the long run. So moving ahead in some ways that we can address some of those. A good model is the mitigation hierarchy, where I appreciate some of you might have heard before. The hierarchy states that your decarbonisation plan must and firstly start and prioritize avoiding emissions. So the emissions in the activities in the first place. So things like, does that trip really has to happen? And do I really have to have that meeting in person, for example? Those were really good leading questions. So if the activity must happen, then reducing those emissions as much as possible. So if I have to go there, can I use a less emitting mode of transport, like public transport, EVs, e-bikes, walking? For example, we have quite a few meetings in the CBD, and we tend to walk through most of them, to be honest. The last port of call is offsetting. Offsetting is not a long-term solution, so only the really hard to abate emissions should be offset or neutralized. Hard to abate emissions will obviously be up to interpretation. So where one company might have a particular source, which they find it's unable to reduce any further, where others will think differently and think they can avoid and reduce those emissions. So regardless of what is defined as hard to abate, the idea is that the mitigation hierarchy will continuously be reviewed and tested. And last point here, just to emphasize, the hierarchy is all about addressing the gross emissions and not the net emissions. So really tackling these at the source. Moving on, we then look in how emissions are calculated to begin with. So the overall greenhouse gas impact will be equal the activity level. In the example here, we have kilometers travel in a fossil fuel car. That is then multiplied by the GHG intensity of that activity. So what is that impact, and essentially how much carbon is associated with that technology? So we got a clear example of, kilometers travel and some things around the technology in terms of alternative biofuel, electricity, electric or hydrogen. So the activity and GHG intensity are key levers to decarbonize, and it's important that we always go back to the simple equation whenever we think about our emission sources. The activity lever can also be translated into a behavioral change. So, for example, taking a more efficient route or driving more efficiently with less abrupt brakes and acceleration. Whereas the GHG intensity lever can be translated into a technology change, as we're discussing today, switching to more efficient or less emitting technologies like EVs and hydrogen. Cool. So finishing off with some opportunities to reduce transport emissions. There's some key points here. The first one is integrating your electric mobility as a service solution. So that really speaks to the data quality and granularity. So when we talk about data quality, that really flows into good decision making. You gotta really ask yourself, what is that data providing me, and what's our ability to reduce based on that? So it's quite an interesting exercise. Appreciate that some of emission sources might have difficult data to begin with, but it's about really focusing in how do we measure that, because as we say, we can't manage what we don't measure. The second point is to rethink your fleet needs, and where necessary, switch to low emitting technologies. Interesting data from Waka Kotahi shows that 90% of travel car in New Zealand is less than 90 kilometers. and on average, Kiwis drive 30 kilometers a day. So those are really, feasible distance when you think about the range that EVs have nowadays. Third point is about public transport and how we can support staff commuting using public transport. We got an example that's close to home. Here at Toitū, we strategically change our offices to a more central location, for example, that will be closer to public transport. And we deliberately remove parking slots from our office premises. Another interesting stat from Waka Kotahi shows that 72% of New Zealand business provide car parking, yet only 22% provide bike parking. On the flip side, 54% of the people would like to cycle more to work, and 40% would like to use public transport more. So I think you would be really surprised by the uptake in some of these. Another interesting strategy that also relates to that previous one is when we think about providing employees with a public transport subsidy. The results and behavior changes are really promising from what we've seen around, and they also could apply to alternative methods of transport, such as e-bike, e-scooters, and those sort of things. Just as an idea here, in terms of a financial indicator, is using carbon credits price in the market nowadays and asking yourself, how much would that cost to neutralize those emissions today? That can help setting up your budget for the next year and also reserving some of those incentives for some of these alternatives. Second to last point, it's about flexible work policy. So this is a key learning that we had from COVID, our ability to work remote. This could have a substantial impact in your transport footprint if staff is allowed flexible working policy. Here at Toitū, we have staff all across the moto in areas with or without office spaces. So it makes quite an interesting dynamic. And the last point is to rethink and optimize your business travel. So going back to that initial question of, does that meeting really has to happen in person? And if so, can I optimize my travel needs? So instead of, for example, flying for just a single meeting, can I line up 2 or 3 meetings on the same day? This way, you will make your trip more carbon efficient. So it's still having kind of the same emissions, but split for further commitments. It's important to remember that about the mitigation hierarchy, as we just talked before, the activity intensity levers, as those are some of the choices that you do have in hand, and that avoiding and reducing emissions in the first place, it's a key element. Thank you very much. I'll hand it over to Kirsten, moving ahead.
Thanks for that, Lewis. Some really good takeaways, and hopefully you guys got some good insight there. I really found the value chain really interesting in terms of, we see a lot in terms of measuring, and that's actually going to increase a lot with a lot of legislation. Many of you are probably familiar with the CNGP legislation that's coming out for government entities. There's also the CDP, or carbon disclosures standards, coming out as well. So we're going to see a shift to wider value chain measuring over the coming years, and that's going to encompass wider travel and transport related activities. So mapping your value chain, understanding hotspots is a great takeaway. I think also the intensity levers is probably one that's really good to go away and map internally. The GHG and activity are the key levers for decarbonisation. So using them to influence and reduce our impact is probably a great piece. So thanks for that, Lewis. Kirsten, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Lewis. That was awesome. I know at Zilch we talk about we only travel to the same city once in a month, and that's really helped us in that space as well. So today I'm just going to share very swiftly talking about sustainable mobility. And I guess as part of our decarbonisation, the important thing is that we stop talking about fleet and we have that wider conversation around mobility. I'm just having a few issues with my screen moving on to the next slide. It was working very well in our practice. Can you see my screen, Toby?
We've got your screen, but not the next slide.
Yeah.
Arrow key, maybe?
Pardon me?
Arrow key, maybe?
Oh, there we go. Got it. Perfect. So thanks for everyone for submitting your questions around what you wanted to hear. These were the key things that came through: reducing the costs and reducing carbon for transport, that behaviour change being such a big key issue for you and your businesses, and also just needing solutions for home work and public charges, and talking about that scope 3 emissions, which Louise talked about as well, with staff commuting, and how you embed that change. So I thought it was useful to just look at what is sustainable mobility. And for Zilch, these were 3 pillars of our business before we even knew about what ESG was. And for us, we put financial first. And I would encourage you to be really data-led with your decision-making around fleet and mobility. It's one of those emotive things that everyone has an opinion on in a business. So having total cost of ownership models and looking at your GPS data will be a really powerful tool for you. Obviously, environmental is critically important, and that's what we're all about as well, and Toitū as well. And also that social piece, and we're seeing more sincerity coming in from businesses looking about how they can make a social impact as well. So for us, those are the 3 pillars when we talk about sustainable mobility. And I just thought it was important to give you some sort of high-level reasons of why this is so important. New Zealand's got the 5th highest car ownership rate in the OECD. And when you think about, we've got over $30 billion in New Zealand invested in vehicles, but yet our cars are used less than 5% of the time. There's a great opportunity for our country to use our capital wisely and not have it sitting in depreciating assets that are poorly utilised, but actually shift to more of an optimised approach. And if you think there's only, there's over $9 billion that's spent with the petrochemical industry every year, electrification is a great opportunity economically for our country. Obviously, that environmental piece that we've touched on, Louise touched on, 17% of our emissions come from transport. And you could see from Louis' slide, if you're looking at your scope 1 emissions, transport is a lot easier to tackle than your property. So whilst there's challenges in approaching it, it is actually an easier one for you to tackle. And if we just look at that social piece, we've got the 4th highest accident rate. So when we are driving those cars, less than 5% of the time, we're not very good at it. And we've got actually a really old fleet in New Zealand, and that has a social impact. It means that we've got cars that have got a low ANCAP rating. We've got an older fleet than the likes of Lithuania and Cuba. And our fleet actually pumps out a lot of emissions as well because it is old. So and the impact for that, which we don't talk about because it's chronic deaths, but we have over 2,247 people die each year directly attributable to our transport. And that research came out last year, and there was a staggering increase for New Zealand. So that has a massive social cost, over $10 billion a year as well. So if you think about those bigger picture reasons, hopefully it will motivate you to make some changes, because if we look at mobility in New Zealand, it's predominantly a red jigsaw puzzle, and to hit our Paris Agreement targets, we need to shift to a green jigsaw puzzle. So that means some of those big pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, which is car ownership, we need to see that piece of the jigsaw puzzle shrink, and we need to see some growth in other areas, and that's cycling, walking, public transport as well. This slide isn't very popular with my friends that drive electric, but I think it's really important that we don't get fixated that electrification is going to solve all of our problems. So you need to be mindful that EVs have got a higher embedded carbon and a higher cost than an ICE vehicle. So if you're putting electric vehicles into your fleet, you need to optimize them. You don't want them sitting in their car park, not moving around and doing anything, because otherwise you're actually wasting money and you are wasting carbon as well. We've also got more minerals. They're dense on minerals. Happy to answer any questions on batteries too. I think it's promising that we're seeing the car manufacturers moving away from the rare earth minerals, and we're moving technology-wise into more high-density solid-state batteries this decade as well, which is fantastic. The other aspect you need to get your head around as well is charging infrastructure. You know, it's likely that if you're installing a lot of chargers, there's complexities like switchboard upgrades and those aspects. So there is a higher investment in the front end with charging infrastructure you need to get your head around. So as I've mentioned, it's important that we look at other zero mobility options as well, and look at adopting, whether it's e-scooters, e-bikes, and walking and more public transport. And I have to confess, I am a Rod car fan, and I really like this comment which talks to that financial sustainability. If we're just going to take our ICE vehicles off the road and replace them with EVs, we're actually not achieving anything. We're actually just spending an additional $100 billion. And anyone that lives in Auckland, you'll see the challenges of congestion. So we've got a great opportunity as we decarbonise to make some smarter decisions. So just to touch on, you know, who Zilch is, we're actually, funnily enough, well known for our public car sharing, but that's actually the smallest part of our business now. So that's EVs that you can book by the minute, by the hour, by the day, or subscriptions. We've got people that have a month-by-month subscription as well. So you just pay for what you use, and they sit in public car parks. The bigger part of our business is what we call eMaaS. So that's EVs, mobility as a service. And that's businesses that want to have their own EVs. They want them branded. They want them in their car park. They need help with charging infrastructure, whether that's homework or an interface with public charging. That's what Zilch does. And they need that wraparound support and that change management piece as well. And with this model, staff can book them privately to take them home, as well as them being used as a tool of trade business card during the day. So it's around, you know, how can we reduce those Scope 1 emissions, but how can we also reduce those Scope 3 emissions on how your staff are travelling to and from work. And I guess as employers, you have a great opportunity to influence what your staff are doing inside the office with their Scope 1 emissions, but also there's a neat social opportunity if you can offer your staff a sustainable option after hours as well. And perhaps that's an option that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford. Now we've got the fantastic Jason from Genesis that's going to talk you through this, but you know, everyone's on a different part of the journey, and we heard Toby talk about that at the beginning, and that this is a transition and it's not perfect, and the important thing is you get started. So different people are on that journey, but I always like to salute Genesis, who've been on this journey for a while, and they were very bold, removing car parks and cars from salary packages, offering staff discounts, really focusing on rationalising that fleet. So we worked very closely with them on their total cost of ownership models, looking at what assets were in their fleet. As Louis said, what are the low-hanging fruit? What can we address first? What are the harder ones? And looking at that longer-term transition. Opening, you know, they're just... they've had EVs in their fleet for a number of years, and now they're opening them up for their staff to book after hours. And I guess the neat thing for them is that there's no FBT. Zilch has a IRD FBT exemption. So it means that they can put in really nice company cars that their staff otherwise wouldn't be able to drive, which is neat. And then Zilch rebates a portion of that private revenue back to our business customers. So it's a way that they can rationalise their fleet, electrify it, optimise it, earn money from it, but have a benefit for their staff without paying FBT as well. So Jason will talk more to that, but it's just really a shout out for the work that Genesis have done. Now, a lot of the questions that came through before the webinar were around, EVs, and that's the natural place we all go to when you're looking to address a fleet. But in all honesty, EVs and what EV you get is the easy bit, and certainly Zilch and manufacturers can help you with that. But it's also having a really robust plan around charging infrastructure. So I would encourage you to invest some time and energy. And that's a key thing that Zilch works with our customers. But the most challenging piece in this is that behaviour change. And I was talking to a customer this week that's just coming on board. And when I said, look, what we need to be doing is working on setting up the project team, and that will incorporate HR, legal, procurement, fleet, health and safety, and marketing, comms, and he said to me, oh my goodness. And I said, look, this internal stakeholder engagement is actually the critical success factor, and we need to start working on that now before these vehicles even are arriving in. And in the background here you can see one of our 90-day project plans, which is just on that initial fleet piece as well. So it's something that can't be underestimated, is just the importance of behaviour change. As I just mentioned, charging infrastructure, and I thought there was a lot of questions on this before, so I just thought I'd just give you an idea around costs. So as I've said, you need something that incorporates work charges, home charges, and public charging infrastructure. So if you look at home and work charges, you're looking at around 2.5–3 K for the capital cost of the charger, and then your installation, depending on it, can be around the same or slightly less, depending on what sort of charger. If you look at the costs, if you're looking at, it's $5 per 100 kilometres if you're using your work charges. If you're being savvy and charging off-peak at home, you're looking at around $2 per 100 kilometres. And if you're using public charging infrastructure, you're looking at around $15 per 100 kilometres as well. And when you compare that to a petrol car, that's around $18 per 100 kilometres. So investing in that charging infrastructure is really important, because if you're thinking from your staff perspective, they want a seamless solution. So that's part of the Zilch DNA is helping create that package as well for our customers. So questions also came up on around Scope 3 emissions and staff commute. So that's in our pipeline. Zilch is working on that technology, being able to have a platform that can easily manage the staff commute data, because talking to our customers, we can see that as an issue. We're also working on having interoperability with micromobility. So we can see, as Louis talked about, a lot of our trips are very small trips. In fact, 1/3 of our trips are 2 kilometres or less. So how can we get our staff using cycling or scooters as well? So we were looking at an interface to make that a lot easier. And touching on that previous slides, talking about education and change management, which is critical, we're working on a next level of education modules on that as well. So just to finish off, another quote from Rod Carr, how we think about transport as a service, public transport, active mobility in the urban environment is critical to whether we use our capital wisely or with high regret. So thanks for your time. Looking forward to some questions, and I'll hand it back to Toby.
Thanks, Kirsten. Really good. Hopefully you guys got a bit of insight there. I didn't realise how old our vehicle fleet was across New Zealand. and that's quite interesting. Obviously, we all want to shift to EVs. I wouldn't mind shifting to one as well, but probably an important consideration. We actually have a lot of members who identify when they go through that hotspot program and identify that the emissions in their vehicles is probably one of their quickest wins. But I agree with the change and the behavioural change in plan and business. It's only going to be effective if you get your leadership and wider buy-in. So there's a really key takeaway for me, and it's not as simple as just rolling it out. And we have those conversations frequently, so it's really good. And I think rationalising it and planning the infrastructure is probably a good point that people miss, in the assumption that it's handled by the government or it's a real easy plug and play. But in fact, it really needs to be built into that wider roadmap, and you can stage it in different parts, right, and grow it. So it's really good. Thank you. Well, really excited to also kind of dive into the case study, and yeah, thanks, Kirsten. And we'll hand it over to jump into Genesis and kind of looking at what you guys have done in recent years and kind of the pathway there. So really excited. So without further ado, Jason, over to you, bud.
Thanks, Tobias, and kia ora everyone again. Yeah, really excited to share what we've done. As I said, some of this happened before my time at Genesis, but yeah, we're quite proud of where we've got to. I'll just share a little bit about Genesis so you can understand kind of where we are and what our travel needs might be. We're a gentailer, so we have a generation aspect to our business where we make electricity through a few forms, including hydro and wind, and have a massive solar program we're looking at the moment to produce more renewables. But we also have the Huntly Power Station, which is a gas predominantly fired station, but also has coal. So we definitely have and sense our responsibility in the transition and have some big plans in that area. But are also not forgetting about things like travel and fleet. So we've done a lot in that area as well. We also have a retail part of our business, which is about 500,000 customers that we are looking how we can influence their carbon as well, but won't go into that too much today at all. So in terms of where we are around the country, we have our main corporate offices in Auckland and Hamilton, with around 500 to 600 staff in each of those. We have some small offices in Christchurch and Wellington as well. We have our main generation sites based in Huntly, Waikato, Moana, Takanu and Tekapo. So very geographically spread around the country. And we have a number of staff in those locations. We have a small wind farm in the South Wairarapa as well. And then we also have 32 LPG sites around New Zealand. So spread out a lot and have lots of reasons to try and travel between those, need to travel between those sites. So yeah, have a reasonable level of travel in our organisation. The first part of what I'll talk to you about is a move that we had of offices from Green Lane down into Wynyard Quarter, where we are now, and some things we did over that move to lower the carbon of our employees, both with the travel they're doing through work and also how they were getting to work, so commuting. I'm just trying to go into present mode here. Oh, there we go. All right, so when we moved down to Wynyard Quarter, we went from kind of environment where there was lots of car parks, so over 200 car parks, and we basically said there's no more private car parks. So we went down to 18 car parks in our new building. So none of the exec got car parks. So they all had to buy into this as well, which was great. Buy-in's really important on your journey to this type of thing. And so we only had car parks for fleet vehicles, a couple of visitor parks, some contractor parks, and a cleaner park. So the cleaner was the only one that still get to keep their car park. So that was a big move and quite a bold move, and created a lot of change in the way that the organisation operated. I'm struggling to go to the next slide as well. Oh, there we go. So this is our new location. You can see the Zilch public car park in the foreground there, and the Genesis building in the background. So we're quite lucky. We we can overflow into the Zilch public fleet as well when we run out of our private fleet that we have with their mobility as a service product. There was a lot of work done with Auckland Transport to educate staff around the public facilities available to get into Wynyard Quarter. So we had lunch and learn sessions with them. We had one-on-one sessions they were able to book with Auckland Transport to help them with their own individual needs. They also helped us with some 2-week free trial cards they could give out so people could try out public transport and see what it was like. And there was a lot of surveys done about where people lived and their public transport journeys. So part of our package was actually put a shuttle on from the eastern suburbs into our office because we recognised those people had a bit of a harder public transport journey. And we actually, managed to fund that out of some of the building move, the guys trying to get us down into this building. So we're really trying to make it really easy for people and take away some of the fears of using public transport. And the other thing we did, which Lewis mentioned on, is subsidy. So we're the first ones to work with Auckland Transport to offer a subsidy on public transport. So we offer 25% off to our staff. That was brought in when we moved in, so everyone could feel a bit more comfortable. They were saving even more money by going on public transport. We've just released that in Hamilton as well with the transport provider down there. So our Hamilton employees can get the same experience. Now that's an important part of it, but the education and getting people comfortable with it is also really important. You can see a picture of our old CEO, Mark England, coming in on his bike there. And that was another key part of getting people into public transport and biking and walking was our end of trip facilities. So when we moved into this new building, we made sure there was some really good facilities for people when they arrived. There's a towel service so they don't have to bring their own towels, and really good change facilities and lockers to enable them to keep their clothes and things here for the week so they can make it nice and easy if they want to walk, bike. And we have execs in our organisation that would only use their car 1 or 2 days a year. So they're cycling in every day through the wind, hail, floods that we get in Auckland now. So that suite of changes that we made, which include some electrification of the fleet, which I'll touch on shortly, we modelled and surveyed our people with the following results. So on the left there, you can see the staff trips before the move. And on the right, we've got the impact of all those changes that we made. So really, really pleased to see that we more than doubled the walking and biking and those types of modes, active modes of transport, doubled the public trips as well, and really shrunk the number of petrol vehicles that were being used. So we got some really big gains in terms of the savings from a carbon perspective. And actually, it's created a bit of community as well. So the cycling community is really strong and they all kind of band together and have social things, and we take on Cycle Week. So we've actually found that, while it's had a massive impact, people really love it. And people like being able to share in the different ways that they come to work. So then if I just touch a bit more on the fleet. So we electrified our fleet, and Zilch was a big part of that. But as Kirsten mentioned, it just wasn't about moving from ICE vehicles to EVs. There's a lot more that came with it. So electrification was one bit, and obviously we've got their public fleet availability for spillover if we don't have our fleet available, which is really nice for us because it's just across the road. But anyone can utilise those Zilch facilities whenever they want from a public perspective. We worked really closely with Zilch to develop a rideshare functionality, so booking a seat in a car. So a lot of our travels between our 2 main offices in Auckland and Hamilton, and it's awesome to be able to see. You just go in there if you're going down, and you see if someone's already going down for the day, and just book a seat with them, which again is awesome from an efficiency point of view. And but again, we've seen some of those social benefits of doing that you're often going in a car with someone you don't know so well, and get to know what they do in the business and learn a bit more about how you might want to work with them better in the future. Over the change that we went through with some of the efficiency gains we have from booking, ride sharing, that sort of thing, we reduced our fleet by approximately 20%. which is really important. As Kirsten said, you don't want to just replace, you want to actually do some efficiency things to make it an economic benefit as well as a carbon benefit. So that worked really well for us. More recently, we've worked with Zilch, as Kirsten mentioned, to enable our fleet to be able to use by our employees after hours. And that was kind of driven by a challenge from our CEO to say, how are we going to get more of our staff into EVs? And that's quite a challenge. That's quite a challenge, right? Like you can try and subsidize them, which is kind of chucking money into incentivizing stuff that might not happen. But we've found it really good when people do use EVs, they might take it up somewhere for a weekend and they just get used to it, get over the range anxiety, see how easy it is, and people fall in love with them pretty easy. And people are pretty stoked they get to drive a car that they wouldn't otherwise been able to afford, but also get really familiar with how easy it is once you get used to driving an EV. So while we get some revenue back from when they do that, it's more around us trying to encourage and expose our employees to this type of transport so we can encourage it in their private life. And one other thing I guess we are proud of is that we'll roll through these cars, these EVs we're bringing in reasonably quickly to bring in a newer fleet, which enables those those other EVs we're no longer using to come into the secondhand market. I thought I'd mention, and you've probably sensed this from Kirsten's presentation, but Zilch has been awesome for us from a thought leadership and challenge point of view. So they are evangelists in what they do. They push the boat really hard, and we really value the fact that while they're so passionate from an environmental point of view, they really look at the economics of it and make sure you're getting efficient use of your fleet. And I'll touch it on in the next slide, but we've also in Auckland got a distributed model where we've got hubs around Auckland, where we've got vehicles located and storage companies and things like that, where our electric fleet is ready for people to take down to Hamilton, and rather than have to come into our Auckland office here at Wynyard Quarter, they can go into somewhere in Penrose or somewhere in Green Lane or somewhere out west and pick up the electric vehicle, leave their car there and go straight down to Hamilton for the day. So that's really helped with the uptake. When you have a distributed model like that, you need to be really careful about how many cars are at each location. And so our team and Zilch look really closely at utilisation of those cars in those different locations and shuffle them around to make sure that we've got the right balance there. One thing we tried with Zilch was awesome, but we've actually rolled it back as one-way trips. So if I'm going down to see my team in Hamilton for a couple of days, rather than booking the car out for 2 days, I just booked the trip. So the 2 or 3 hours it might take me to go down there, depending on traffic. And then it goes into the availability for other people to use while I'm down there. Which is an awesome idea. We just found cars were not always ending up where they needed to be, so we've rolled that back for the moment. But we're looking forward to be able to get back into that once we can overcome some of those hurdles. So I think the message I'd share here is try and push the boat out, but don't be afraid to try things. But you may need to roll some stuff back because some of these things are quite new, and you've got to give it a go. And yeah, we're hoping we can get back into that at some stage soon. Some other kind of considerations that are probably worth mentioning is charging infrastructure, which Kirsten's mentioned. That can be quite big. We've found some recent costs for us. We had 4 chargers going to our Hamilton office. The total cost of that was around $18,000. That involved some infrastructure upgrade in terms of power cables, but wasn't too bad. We've had other quotes for our LPG site in Fielding, which was more like $250,000 for a charger. And the scary thing about that is often that cost is going into the ground for cables to be upgraded with your local provider. And so we've also been looking at things like chargers with battery in them, so they can trickle charge over a period and then dump really quickly into your car when you need to charge it. And that way, the cost that you're putting into is in something that you can take away and it's not stuck in the ground if you decide to move or go somewhere else. But getting across those charging infrastructure costs are really important when you go through this type of situation, because it can be quite varied depending on how fast you want to charge those cars and what sort of power is available in those locations that you want to charge. I've already kind of mentioned the Auckland hubs. Yeah, that's a key way to drive usage for us, having cars distributed around Auckland. Range anxiety is a big one. So, and that all just goes through education, getting people to give it a go. But I know a lot of people that I talk to about this are like, well, how do you get to Hamilton and back? And, you know, the vehicles we have kind of an over 400 kilometre range, and I don't know, Hamilton's less, I don't know, it's around 100 kilometres, I think, or maybe slightly more. So you can actually get there and back really comfortable. And there's also some public charging infrastructure on the way, which we use if we need to. Making sure your people are really disciplined and plugging in the chargers correctly when they return them is a big one. So you don't want people getting into cars where they arrive to the car and it's already half empty. So just being aware of that and monitoring that's important. We also removed personally assigned vehicles as part of our change. So a lot of our sales team took a bit to getting used to that. So it's a bit different needing to book than just having one readily available. But yeah, some of those stats Kirsten mentioned around vehicle usage in New Zealand being really low. We've just got to change our thinking in terms of how we use vehicles. So everyone got them taken away and put into a pool situation. There's obviously some employee salary package type considerations you need to go through, but they're easily overcomable with your HR teams. We also pushed really hard on kind of vehicle options and availability and testing users' true needs. So as I mentioned at the start, we've got a generation team that are out in the wop-wops with big four-wheel drives, which lots of them are fairly fond of, to be honest. So our team did quite a deep needs analysis just to make sure we could test whether they really needed those. So we've got things at the moment like golf carts at Huntly where people had trucks before. They actually needed a golf cart to get around the site. So we changed them out. And then we've got other vans, two-wheel drive utes that we've replaced with EVs so that they can get around in a more carbon efficient way, but still do what they need to do. Just really quickly, some of the commercials. So in total for us, our EV fleet at the moment costs about 8% more to run, but they are a newer fleet and a safer fleet. We've noticed fuel costs going up really quickly. So we see that trend continuing, which will make EVs even more efficient. We don't actually include the electricity. So that's not a fair comparison. Being a power company, we just don't track it. And there's a kind of some road user charges impact as well, which ends July, which will increase the cost of our diesel fleet. But as I said earlier, we kind of reduced our fleet by about 20%. We went through this change, so that more than offsets the extra increase from the EVs. And then just the charging infrastructure CapEx requirement you've got to be aware of. So where to from here? Our four-wheel drive fleet needs some work, and we've got some ideas around that, which we are working on. We don't see good options in that space for another kind of 2 to 3 years en masse. So we're working on some alternative solutions for that. We're looking at e-bus from between Auckland and Hamilton, which will increase our employees' ability to be able to get together when they travel, but also work while they travel. And then we've still got a LPG fleet, which is, we've got 4 LPG electric trucks that we're trialing and seeing how that works, but we've still got a bit to do in the truck space. So yeah, we've still got a lot to go and learned a lot from what we've done so far, but yeah, I'd encourage everyone to give it a try and see what you can achieve, and don't be afraid to try some things, and yeah, you can roll them back if necessary, but it's all worked pretty well for us, and we're really proud of what we've achieved so far, and excited about what there is to do. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jason. That's really great. Gosh, some pretty good numbers in there, and great insight into how you guys have transitioned over. I think the way you handled it in terms of diversifying how you tackle the issues, particularly subsidies with the transport, or thinking a bit more holistically about not simply rolling out EVs, but the dynamic uses you can use with them, is probably a key takeaway that I think, yeah, a lot of businesses and a lot of the sustainability managers, when they're in there, don't think of the full dynamic use that could come through from that. So that's really good. we've got about 4 minutes left on before we hit the hour. So I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. One of the ones, we'll kind of work through them, but there was a question that said, Trevor said he's seen data that indicates if you've already owned an ICE vehicle, it's better in terms of GHG emissions to drive it until it's uneconomic to keep, and then replace it with an EV because of the embedded emissions are higher for a life cycle of that vehicle. Do either of you have a thought on that? I wonder, Kirsten, does Zilch have an analysis on that at all?
It really depends on the vehicle, to be honest, and what the usage profile of that driver is. To answer, it sort of talks to what I said earlier. If you're going to replace your car and you're not driving a significant amount of kilometres, you would be better to hold that vehicle. And obviously there's an opportunity, depending on your lifestyle. It may be essential that you have to have a car, but also looking at mode shift if appropriate. I guess the big opportunity for New Zealand is to go from a 3-car family down to a 2-car family. We have 4.6 million cars in this country. So I guess, that's what I see as the more realistic option, is to adopt other modes, still have cars in your household, but reduce the number that you have in your household.
Great.
Yeah. Also, think about those, the activity level, in this case. So can you actually take a better route for your trip, and just drive more efficiently in those terms? When you look at the life cycle of EVs, yes, there's a big element of embedded emissions, but through the lifespan of the vehicle, you're going to have less emissions overall than an ICE car. So it's kind of a balanced exercise, I guess, and going through the calculation.
Great, thanks both. There's quite a few chats and questions around heavier vehicles as well. I know, Jason, you're looking at it. Kirsten, you're probably seeing a lot of that technology in conversations, and we're having discussions with our members around buses, trucks. Should we be applying that technology, and how do we balance that with other issues? I know, for example, Lewis, we have companies like Waste Management who are shifting their entire truck fleet onto electric, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Myself or Kirsten first?
You go, Louis.
Okay, cool. We see some clients and organizations exploring other fuel types like hydrogen, having a refueling station on site, and those sort of things. What I've came across through is that for very large vehicles, and heavy vehicles, then electrification might not be the best solution out there. So depends on the vehicle type and the type of trip.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone summed it up to me with electrify everything you possibly can, and if you can't electrify that, look at hydrogen. I don't think it's a question of competition between electrification and hydrogen. Hydrogen, you need electrification anyway for the engine to work. So hydrogen will play a part. It will most likely be a niche part in New Zealand. We've already had the likes of Toyota saying, look, for our small compact fleet, it is electrification. So I guess the easiest win for all of you on this call is starting with your light fleet, and then, as Genesis have done, dipping their toe in and starting to electrify some of the heavier fleet as well.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, and we have a lot of our science and advisory team talking to our members, and this is a challenge that comes up a lot when you're having quite dynamic conversations with your leadership, and you're crunching the numbers and trying to map out a plan. And it's that balancing act of, there's a short term, and when we say short term, in the next 2 years, that this kind of conversation needs to be had, but there's also the 5 and 10 year long. And we might not have that technology here and now to shift all our trucks and buses and four-wheel drives, but it's coming, and we can see from overseas markets that technology is evolving and it's on the cusp of being rolled out. So I think a lot of that is about embedding that mindset into your business, right, and having that future state. And it's probably something Genesis is looking at as well. Is that right, Jason?
Sorry, I missed that. I was typing a question, and could you just repeat that?
Yeah, is that you've rolled out this shift to a lot of EV and wider transport options to reduce that business travel, but is there also a conversation with the business around the future state and those bigger future technologies that quite aren't here yet, but you're planning already to maybe adopt them in the 5-year timeline? Is that coming up much?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the big thing for us is sort of that four-wheel drive vehicles at the moment. Is probably the main one we need to crack, which we have a few ideas on and are going down a couple of paths there. But yeah, thinking about how we get around and the efficiencies with that, like I mentioned, an e-bus between Hamilton and Auckland is something we're considering. That would go with regularity, that would enable us to really optimize our fleet a lot more. So yeah, always keeping on top of it, I guess.
Cool. I think maybe one last question, and I appreciate we've run over a bit, but a few questions as well around understanding, Jason, how Genesis has tackled issues like overcoming employee packages to give up their cars and opening up those EVs to staff or go to public. So is there any kind of imparting wisdom you'd give to our audience of these getting the employee buy-in and making them kind of come on this journey? Is there any, if you leave them one answer, what would it be?
So the kind of package things are something that the sort of HR teams would need to work through. And I'm not aware exactly of how Genesis did that, but in a previous organisation had a similar thing. There was actually a kind of buyout of parks because they are actually an asset that come under your package. So you've just got to work through that, and there's probably a financial, where I've seen it previously, there's a financial piece that you need to overcome. But really, education, making it easy. Working with the likes of Auckland Transport, they were really great with us to be able to come in and educate our people about how easy it was to make people feel comfortable with that. I think it's the biggest thing.
Great, thanks. Kirsten, would you have any parting remarks?
No, I was just going to say, which might be helpful. Obviously, we work really closely with businesses on that whole change management piece and supporting them. I'd just say that it's not a fast conversation. It's something that you need to signal to your staff and have a plan. It's a long, I'm saying it's a 6-12 month conversation. On average, we would see a buy-it on a car around that 15K mark. We obviously see a lot higher, and we've seen lower as well. So it depends on the business, but hopefully those numbers are helpful for you, and happy to engage on that as well.
Great, thanks so much. Look, we're really pushed over. We've got a lot of questions. For everyone who's still on the call, we'll summarise this, and we'll make sure these questions are issued and answers with them along with the recording. So I'd just like to say thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Kirsten, thank you, Jason and Louis, for your time, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll make sure you've got a copy of this in our assets and resources. So thanks for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.